My name is John, and I live in a big house on an even bigger hill. I live alone, so it's full of unused rooms and, of course, a mortgage. So I can use all that extra space to pay off that mortgage. I spent the pandemic converting my house into a duplex. The hill gave me a walkout basement that I use as a wood shop. It also gave me an unused area 10 feet below the first floor deck. One day, my tenant came to me and asked for an outdoor place to sit and watch the wildlife. I hit upon the idea of adding a second deck on the ground level. Matching the footprint of the deck above, the area is weirdly long and shallow at 6 feet by 14.5 feet. Not a fan of seams in decks, I found a design that works for that shape and minimizes long runs, which also saves money, as longer 16-foot decking boards tend to get expensive. Let's start with the foundation and frame. I had two ideas about how to build this. The most obvious was to attach a ledger to the back and right sides directly to the center block foundation of the house. That sounds simple on the surface, but requires some stuff I don't have, and the walls weren't quite square. The second method is called a floating deck. The deck sits on stilts and is largely independent of the house. That saves the risks and complications of drilling into the foundation, but comes with a major headache in leveling everything up along the sides with the walls. I started with a 6x6 center post. I could have used a 4x4 post and a decking block, also known as an elephant's foot, but I had the larger post and a bag of concrete mix just lying around, so I used that instead. Besides, the larger post gives me a little more meat to attach to later. The post was also an original part of the railing for the deck directly above, so there's some symmetry there. I decided to start with the hard part. That is, the long back wall. It's a bit tricky because the ledger itself is sandwiched between the 4x4 stilts on which it sits and a solid concrete block wall. That means I really can't assemble it in place. So I decided to build it in my shop and just hope that I could level it up. Each joint consists of two 3-inch torque screws and one 4-inch lag screw. The first time I set one of the 4x4 posts into one of the concrete decking blocks, I discovered a problem. The casting process for the decking blocks was perhaps less than great. There were little bits of concrete strewn across the interior bottom of the block, making the 4x4 not sit solidly. I was able to scrape most of it out, but had really no easy way of removing the bits of debris from the corners. Rather than spending half of my life trying to figure out a way to do that, I hit upon the idea of simply whacking off the bottom corners of the posts, which rather nicely solved the problem. Not the prettiest cuts I've ever made, but for my purposes, they work just fine. So here's the basic problem. The board is attached to the 4x4 post with lag screws from the outside, but what do you do when the outside of the board faces a concrete wall? Just in case you were wondering, building the sections and then attempting to level them in place works, but is painful. So this is just simple gardening cloth, but trust me, it's a lot easier to spend a few minutes doing this now than it is to spend the rest of your life pulling up the weeds growing between the boards and the deck. Before inserting the lag screws in the joists, I checked the now completed frame per square. It's just tacked together on the front two sides. The existing 6x6 post I'm using as an anchor point turned out to not quite be in alignment with everything else. The front wall of the frame was being pushed out way too far. So because the footprint I'm working with is so wide and shallow, I opted for a design that has two separate rectangles inside borders. In order for it to look right though, the center decorator pieces need to be in the exact center of the deck. Despite my best efforts, I was actually off by about ½ an inch, which you'll see me compensate for later, but it's close enough that no one's going to notice. The width of the center section is the width of two 5½ inch wide decking boards, plus the 1/4 inch gap on either side, as well as a 1/4 inch gap in the center. The actual joists themselves are there to support the decking boards on either side, and not the center boards running from front to back. It'll all make a little more sense in just a minute. So here's where you have to get creative with the framing of the picture frame design. Remember that here, here, and here, you're going to have decking boards moving from back to front. The corners of your frames are going to meet at 45s. So you need to have something under the ends of those 45-degree joints in order to support them.